Hey,
Well, hello there, guys, and hello, Internet, and welcome to September Music Club. I almost forgot what month it was. We are for those of you who are unfamiliar, we're the Dragonfly Arts and Creative Collective, and we hold these club discussions every month. So you can feel free to come back next month and check us out. You can find us here on the link that you see before you on Facebook. That is our group where we do most things. So if you're already watching this on Facebook, then you already know that. But if you're catching us on YouTube, please come and join us on Facebook. It's a grand old time over there. But that being said, Rebecca always has the housekeeping announcements that she goes through, and I'm running. If you guys couldn't tell, I'm running tonight's club discussion because Rebecca's out of town, and I don't remember what all the things that she usually says are. But we do have a Patreon, so if you like what we do and you'd like to support us, go ahead and click the link in the description and give us some money. That'd be great. Thanks. As well as you are more than welcome to join us on weekly live discussions that we have on Saturdays to support artists and creatives. You can find the link to that in the Facebook group. You can find the link to most things in the Facebook group. We also invite people who join on those Saturday discussions on these panel calls. So if you're interested in joining us, please go to the Facebook group to get more information. Let's see, anything else? I think that was, last thing. This month, in the month of September, we are discussing Elliott Smith, as you can see on the screen before you, and his first studio album on a major label, EXO. So all that being said, let's just dive in. I would love to know your guys' first kind of like overall thoughts and impressions. Have you listened to Elliott Smith before?
I'll go first. I moved to Portland in 2006, and I couldn't get away from Elliott Smith if I wanted to. He's kind of I mean, at least at that point, I think he had passed away only 3 years before that, right? And so
2003, I think, yeah.
Kind of a mascot deity kind of thing. And in a lot of ways, he really exemplifies Portland. I was shocked to find out that he passed away in LA and actually spent a lot of time in LA. But I don't own his albums, but my main impression of him was like, he would come on whatever, the stream, the radio, and you would go, that's Elliott Smith or somebody trying to sound like him. So like from an artistic standpoint, he had very distinctive, at least in the stuff that I'm aware of his, it's really obvious that it's him.
Mm-hmm.
Me.
Well, I mean, this was my high school years. I got introduced to him through, as all millennial kids got into indie music through the soundtrack of Garden State. So, yeah, and then I just kind of went on a deep dive, and I realized, because I went through and I actually listened to like every album practically. The only one I didn't listen to for this research was his self-titled album. I just didn't get around to it because I like the other ones better. And I guess what I learned is that I don't know all his songs. I thought I knew all his songs, but I guess back then what I did was I went and I cherry picked which ones I liked off of each album. So I would be like listening to one of the albums and I'd be like, wait a second, I don't know this song. What about you, Tim?
sorry, I'm obviously stuffing my face.
All good.
I had been aware of him, but I'd never gotten around to listening. And I do remember when he passed away. So I never really listened to him. So this is the first time me listening to him. First impressions. It's nice to hear somebody who writes songs. because we don't have too many songwriters anymore. I mean, yeah, we have what's her name? The big the blonde girl.
Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift, thank you.
Wait a second. We have Jason Isbell. We have Billie Eilish and her brother.
And
Come on.
Billie
We do,
Eilish.
we do have
It's
a few.
very out of fashion.
But
Yeah,
if you,
There's a
you know,
fridge. What the freak is that?
if you listen, Rick Beato does these. Okay, I'm going to listen to the top 10 on Spotify this week, and the top 10 on Spotify. There are very few actual songs. So that was nice. He reminds me a lot of the material on what I heard on this album. At least the first three quarters of it reminded me of 60s pop. A lot of British influence, it seemed to me. I
Yeah,
heard a lot.
definitely Beatles diaspora.
Yeah, definitely a lot of British and a lot of and some American stuff that fed off that British thing. That's what I hear to songwriting. Production wise, I thought I was very frustrated. I thought he was too far back in the mix and the musicians were too loud. Is he the guitar player, by the way?
Yeah.
He's a great friggin' guitar player. Just seriously awesome fingerstyle player.
Yeah, he
But
reminded me a little of Nick Drake, don't you think?
yeah, exactly. But I was really annoyed because a lot of the times I had to really listen to hear the lyrics because it felt like his voice was buried in the mix underneath a lot of the music. I don't know,
That's actually something that when I was reading through about him is like something that he's known for. They called it like a gossamer web of vocals that he weaves rather than like straight like vocalist. Like cuz he's very soft, he's not very overpowering.
no.
Yeah.
The one time that I know I don't know which song it was, but there's a song that all of a sudden pops up and he starts to be able to cut through the mix because they've doubled his vocals. So we've got two voices there, and there on whatever song that was, he still was being overpowered by the music, but not as badly as it was in some of the other tunes.
Mm-hmm. Are you talking about Sweet Adeline?
Sweet Adeline was where I noticed the problem. I don't think his voice is doubled on that one.
Well, and that's something that he's known for as well, and we'll get into it a little bit more. But about layering his voice, that's something that he actually started doing on his self-produced albums, like when he first started.
I need to go back and listen to his earlier albums. You said this is his first major label, so I need to go back and hear those and check out what that mix is like.
Yeah, he has two prior studio albums before this that were produced like in studio under a smaller label. This was his first album with DreamWorks.
Okay.
And then I think he has one self-produced album before that, but it's not on his discography because they only include studio recordings. So let's get into it. So a little bit about this album. It was recorded between 97 and 98 and released in 1999. Or yeah. Oh no, 98. It was released in 98. Right before Figure Eight and after Either Or. If anyone out there knows a little bit about Elliott Smith's work. It was recorded in Los Angeles. The genre is kind of all over the place. I would just call it indie rock, indie folk rock. Although one of the songs on this album is a little bit more pop inspired than I'm used to with him, which I have mixed feelings about. It was produced by DreamWorks, like I said before, and it was relatively well received. A lot of the major publications gave it 4 and 4.5 stars. Rolling Stone only gave it 3, though, but can't win them all, I guess. Yeah, and obviously we can talk a little bit about Elliott Smith's life and history a little more, I have some of that pulled up as well. I don't have it on slides, but I have it ready to look at, because he led an interesting life. And you already mentioned his death, which was very tragic in the indie scene. I remember when it happened. It was only about 3 years after I got into him. And I was really looking forward to hearing more music from him, but we only got one posthumous album. So what was each of your favorite song on this album?
Oh, gosh. I can't say I have a favorite. Sorry.
Gun to Your Head.
I'm sorry. Is that a song on the album?
No, I'm saying if I put a gun to your head and made
I-
you pick one.
Honestly, I couldn't.
So in a, like a good way, like you like them all equally, or?
Well, I mean, I haven't listened to it that much, and I thought it was pretty even. You know, to me, there wasn't anything that was out of the norm, you know, like amazingly more amazing than the rest of it, and or something that just kind of stunk, you know. Um, and, and that's what struck me about the album. It's just like it's really consistent. But you know, I at this time I wasn't listening to this kind of music, so I wouldn't have heard the hits. Like I say, I was exposed to him when I moved to Portland in 2006. I mean, I knew the name, but listening to him and understanding his sort of cultural impact. And so this was actually the first time I've listened to it without the sort of the weight of the cultural impact in Portland on me, you know? So that was interesting. But yeah, I, you know, didn't have any favorites. A lot of great tunes. I wish I could write songs like that.
Yeah, I remember what made me interested in him from the beginning was just his aptitude for lyricism and harmony. Like just the way his lyrics like flow and not necessarily in the way that you would think. I don't know. It's just a very interesting way that he writes lyrics. And then the way that he harmonizes his own voice by layering his vocals, which is something that he's very well known for.
Mm-hmm.
Tim, do you have a favorite song?
You know, I don't know the material well enough to be able to pick a favorite song, but I was immediately impressed by the guitar playing on the first tune, Sweet Adeline, and I actually went through most of the album. I used Amazon Prime, and I was actually reading the lyrics along as they went, and I was just very impressed. I think he's a fine lyricist. I need to spend more time with him to, you know, and it might, you know, sometimes I wonder if because we don't have a lot of great lyricists anymore. I wonder if I'm just too, you know, I'm like, oh, this is a decent lyric. This guy's brilliant. So yeah, I just need to spend more time with him, and I'm willing to spend more time with him because I think he seems to be a great songwriter. I would love to hear him in a more stripped down sense without electric guitars, you know, with just maybe. I would love to hear him with just are any of his albums just him and an acoustic guitar?
Either or is much more strictly acoustic. Figure Eight is the one that came after this, is a little bit, it's not as produced as this one, so it's got a little bit more variation. I like that one a lot too.
All right.
And I don't think he toured. Didn't he mostly tour solo? He didn't tour with a band. Did he ever, like his live?
He actually, he played with a band in his early career.
No, I mean with the Elliott Smith material. Like once he started doing solo albums, did he ever tour? I mean, what I was trying to tell Tim is I think all of his live stuff would be just him and his guitar, I think.
Yeah, I haven't listened to a lot of the live stuff, but there are recordings. There's albums of what he did live and things like that. I think it was just him, and like maybe he had some tracks recorded for certain instruments in the songs, like if there was a piano or strings or something. But yeah, I don't think he had a band with him when he toured, from what I remember.
Yeah.
Well, if I had to pick one, I mean, I love this album. It, like I said, it takes me back to my high school days. So it's all just a lot of nostalgia for me. So it just really kind of puts me back in that place where I was like emo and feeling the lyrics, because a lot of his lyrics were inspired by his drug addiction and depression. So it really spoke to my little emo black heart. But I think back in the day, I would have said that Bled White was my favorite song. Like if you'd asked me back then. And I still do love that song, but I think I Didn't Understand is my new favorite after listening through again.
Yeah. And you know, I was just thinking about what Tim said about his sensibilities as a songwriter and a guitar player, is that culturally he's much more connected to what happened. Well, I mean, I guess you could say this about everybody. He's much more connected to what happened before him than what's happened since, you know, when we sort of seen the deconstruction of the song and stuff like that. And I was kind of struck by that. This is the first time I like I said, I think I mentioned this is the first time I listened to it without the sort of the whole culture of Elliott Smith in Portland. You know, I haven't listened to him since I left Portland. It's just so interesting that I don't mean to say that he's dated, but
he kind of I kind of get what you're saying. Like he exists in his own cultural era. Like there's not a lot. Like I was reading about a couple of artists who have either covered him to play tribute or who have sampled like very few of his songs. But yeah, you don't hear a lot of sampling or things going on. He just kind of exists as he was.
Yeah.
As an artist.
But there's a lot more traditional stuff. Like listening to it now, you hear more of the traditional songcraft and guitar playing that at the time I don't think struck me. I sort of thought of him as sort of leaving or on the way away from that tradition, but he's actually connected to it in an interesting way that I didn't catch at first. You know what I mean? And you know what's I had to look this up. When I first heard him, I listened a lot more back then to the first Bon Iver album. And I thought, oh, he's like doing the Bon Iver thing. And then I looked it up and like Bon Iver started like 10 years after him. Right. So now I'm listening to Bon Iver going, wow, that's a very Elliott Smith, especially the first album, right? Like really stripped down in a different kind of way, kind of in a more folky way, less Beatle-esque way, or Beatle diaspora way. And that just kind of blew me away because I sort of had sort of melded them together, like either Bon Iver happened first or they happened at the same time. And so he definitely had an influence on folks like that, I think. And what's also interesting is I read some small thing on the Wikipedia page where he was not just big in Portland, he was big in the music culture, which was weird because this is very not grunge, right? And there's, you know, a lot of bands that kind of got swept under the rug by grunge. And he's from the Northwest, right? He's from friggin' Portland, right? So you would
he's
think,
from Ohio, but he moved to Texas and then he got big in Portland.
okay. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. But you would think if anybody's going to get swept under the rug by grunge, it's going to be somebody in Seattle or Portland, you know? And yet he's still kind of, and the comment I was referring to is just him just kind of thinking, Jesus Christ, this is not at all like grunge. And he was just astounded that there was a response to him, right? That and an impact on the music culture in the midst of grunge, which was kind of the opposite of what he was doing. Not like you sing like him in Alice in Chains, you're not even going to ever hear him. You think Tim's having trouble hearing him now, right? He'll just be like, and then you can't hear him. So
it's interesting to think of him being in that period because he is so not I mean, as soon as I listened to that first song, Sweet Adeline, and just as each song progressed, I thought, oh, this guy is totally based. His influences are 60s pop. That's what was overwhelming to me. And I mean, talk about, so if you're doing that, you know, that's there's nothing that contributed to grunge. It's difficult to find a thread back to 60s pop in grunge. Or if we just want to call it the Seattle scene, I don't know that grunge is a great word to define all the music that was coming on that scene. But yeah, I mean, I imagine there was probably people that thought, okay, I don't need another grunge. Let me check this guy out. Oh, this is nice. This is different. This doesn't sound like everybody else that's playing right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm
Sorry.
sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, he really is just kind of his own thing. Like he did not he's very much the pure form of the artist that we think about when we're like somebody who's producing art for the sake of the art and not for like fame or notoriety or money or whatever it is. He was notoriously very resistant to like any kind of recognition. One of his songs, I forget which one, I was reading about it in my research, but was nominated for an Academy Award. And he was asked to come and play on the Academy Award stage, and he did not want to do it. And so he didn't want to deal with all of that.
Did you hear how they threatened him into doing that?
Well, yes, and I was getting to that. But like he didn't want all that attention. So the way that the producers got him to do it was that they threatened to have someone else come and play it. They were like, "Fine, you can not come and play on the Academy Awards if you want to, but we're going to get somebody else to play your song."
Yikes.
So he begrudgingly did it.
And they cut it down too, right? They only gave him 2 minutes.
Yeah, it was like 2 minutes.
Yeah, I think the first time that I had heard of him was that what movie was it? I think it was good. Wasn't it
Good Will Hunting? Yeah.
Good Will Hunting was the first movie he was on, right? Even though he was on, I think he was more known for other movies.
Yeah, I think so. And that was the one that got him the Academy Award nod.
Right.
Yeah.
That was the first time I became aware of him, but I was listening to other things at the time, so he just didn't come onto my into my queue. But I'm curious to go back because I mean I'm looking at the dates. Oh, that's the recorded dates. When did he record his first album?
95. Well, it depends on what you call his first album because he had a super indie thing that was basically a cassette he gave to a record label and they put it out.
So when was that?
That was 95.
His first album on a label was Roman Candle in 94.
Right. So I mean, there's just 4 years between that and this album, and he feels like he's a fully formed songwriter here. And I'm wondering how. I'd be curious to hear his earliest recordings to see how much of that that level of craft is already there. Because for all the flaws on this album, it's difficult to escape the fact that he's a great songwriter and he's a very individual songwriter. He doesn't, I talk about how I get this feeling of 60s pop from him, but that's just in a very general sense. You're right when you say that he's very much himself and in his own universe. He's created his sound, his music, and the lyrics that he writes are very individual. And I think it was you, Miguel, who said, when you heard him, you knew it was either Elliott Smith or it was somebody who was trying to sound like Elliott Smith. Because I think there's a level of craft here, at least at this point, that just makes him a totally distinctive entity of his own. You just don't confuse him with anything else.
Oh, so the song that was nominated for an Academy Award was Miss Misery. But here's a little backstory on Roman Candle. In the early 90s.
Miss Misery is Good Will Hunting, not Garden State, right?
Yeah, Good Will Hunting, yes. In the early 90s, Smith's girlfriend at the time convinced him to send a tape of songs that he had recently recorded on a borrowed 4-track Cavity Search Records. Cavity
What a great
Search
name for a
Yeah.
label.
The owner, Christopher Cooper, asked to release the entire album of songs, which surprised Smith, as he was expecting only a deal for a 7-inch record, and the album became Smith's first release from a Candle. He said that I thought my head would be chopped off immediately when it came out, because at the time it was so opposite to the grunge thing that was popular. So
Yeah.
That really says something, that he was able to stand out with all of the Seattle scene music that was coming out, that was so almost monolithic in a way, and to
yeah,
have his
he's
very distinctive voice cut through all that.
right. And he said he was very shocked that it was well received.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah,
It's
he was
also,
very much not wanting to be in the limelight, this guy.
yeah. What's also interesting is, I don't think he's quite at the level of our best songwriters like Paul McCartney or Neil Finn, but he's right below that. But there's not a lot of people, at least, and maybe I'm looking in the wrong spot, and Beckett, you might know better than I. It doesn't seem like a lot of people cover his stuff,
No,
right?
they
I
don't.
mean,
Yeah, which is what I was kind of alluding to before, with like, he feels like he exists in his own little pocket universe, because his music hasn't really lived on outside of him, which is interesting. I don't know really what to make of it, but yeah, I mean, when you hear Elliott Smith, it's in his voice. It is Elliott Smith. It's nothing else. There's no covers, there's no samples on other tracks. It
there's
just is what
one.
it
Wasn't there
is.
one?
There's one. Yes, only one.
One hip hop.
Yeah.
But that's just interesting and weird. But it might speak more to what Tim alluded to earlier, where songs are just out of fashion. So the generation that followed him, they don't do songs. So he was sort of a dead end in that way in terms
Maybe.
of cultural influence. And that's not to say, at some point people are going to start writing bridges again. I gotta believe, and playing in a room with other humans again, and not doing 90% of their album on their laptop again. And so he could have a resurgence, because he's going to be, the next generation of 13-year-olds is going to discover him and go, holy cats, this stuff's great. Nobody's covered it.
Well, it's, if he hadn't passed away, it's very possible he'd be in that rarefied atmosphere. Although his personality suggests he probably wouldn't want to be there. If he wasn't as big as what's her name, whose name I always forget, Taylor Swift or Billie Eilish.
Don't tell the Swifties; they will kill you.
If I like her, her music is really not my thing, but as a human being, I adore her.
No, but even to forget her name,
yeah,
blasphemy.
I watched that documentary on her, and I just completely fell in love with her. I think she sounds like an absolutely wonderful person. Her music just doesn't really speak to me, although her newer stuff I find interesting. But so maybe if Elliott Smith hadn't died, he would be avoiding becoming, Taylor Swift or Billie Eilish. But I think you might see other artists of his type, of maybe Taylor Swift's type or Billie Eilish, covering his material.
It's possible. He did do a lot of like collaborations and contributions. So like, if he had still survived, then he could have gone on to collaborate with other artists and have that kind of ubiquity. It's entirely possible. So here is the list of the personnel on this album, which I was not as surprised to read as many people were involved as there are when you're listening to it and you hear all of the instrumentals and you hear all of the brass and woodwinds and strings on all of the tracks. Like, obviously there were a lot of musicians involved.
Totally makes sense. John Brion was involved, but he's not producing, he's just playing, right? Joey Waronker.
No, I think he was a producer as well.
Oh,
Yeah,
on this one?
from what I read, yeah.
Oh, interesting. But anyway, or I think you say his name Breon. John. Anyway, but like, if you ask me like, well, who are the guys in LA that'd be most likely to work on this, it would be that sort of people in the Beck sphere and John Breon and stuff like that.
Mm,
He did a lot of that. Didn't he do a lot of the Amy Mann stuff, I think, as well? I think he did.
you
Is
would know better than I.
is Joey related to Lenny?
Yep, it's his son.
But
Ah,
my goodness, how prolific Mr. Elliott Smith was. Look at all of the instruments he contributed on this album.
Yeah, and he did that. Well, so that was the only thing that made me surprised that people like Joey Waronker and John Breon were on the album was that I just kind of assumed he played everything, right? Because it like on first listen, this sounds like, what was the McCartney album that was all Paul McCartney, the Stevie Wonder albums that were all Stevie Wonder. Prince is a little bit different, but it just sounds like, or Bon Iver, right? Which just sounds like one dude playing all the instruments, right? And so I was only surprised in that it's more of a compliment to these other folks that they didn't step all over that and make it seem like he hired all these LA session people. It sounds like one guy playing all the instruments, and there's contributions, and I'm sure the contributions were valued because they ended up on the record, but it doesn't cover him up. Right? It doesn't wallpaper over him. It doesn't try to turn him into whoever was selling a lot in 1998. You know what I mean? Who was selling a lot in 1998? Maybe Sheryl Crow, right?
Yeah, maybe he, because he had the backing of a major record label behind him, he kind of wanted to bring in some outside, talent or something.
But that's also credit to I thought the producers were Rob Schnapf and Tom Rothrock, but those guys are
Oh
like
yeah, you're right. Yes.
those guys are like big time producers, so it's a credit to them that they didn't squash him, that they didn't turn him into something else. Right? Because I just like.
Well, he is also listed as a producer on this album.
Elliott?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's interesting. Your first album on a major label. It would be interesting to talk to him about like, well, did you feel like it was like an even Steven thing between you and Rob and Tom, or were they sort of, in charge and you had to sort of take direction because it's your first, the label, they're there because the label's there. The reason he's not producing it is because the label wasn't comfortable with that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it really seems like
it's to their credit that he didn't get squashed. It totally sounds like Elliott Smith on freaking everything.
Yeah, it seems like there was a real effort to preserve the essence of him as an artist on this, which is
yes, and that can totally go wrong. Your first album on a major, totally.
Which, to that point, I have always had a problem, not necessarily a problem. So this is the one that I wanted to talk about with Baby Britain. What do you guys think about Baby Britain?
I'd have to hear it. I'd have to hear it again.
I listened to it, but I have such trouble with song titles in general.
Oh,
but it was one of the singles, right?
It was the single for this. Yeah.
What's your problem?
Well, and it's not necessarily a problem per se. It's just, it's much more poppy of a song than I'm used to from him. So I'm not entirely sure how much of that song was Elliott and how much of it was influenced. You know what I mean? And it's very catchy. It's not that it's a bad song. It's just much more produced, much more pop. And coming in.
It's interesting. Nothing really stood out like that to me. Like the label, put the producers in a headlock and say, we need a single, go back, right? So to me, it's a subtle difference because I didn't walk away from any of these tracks going, oh, somebody wanted a single here. I
don't know, maybe as an Elliott Smith fan,
yeah,
and like listening
to more sensitive to that, yeah.
Maybe, yeah. What did you think, Tim?
It's a shame that he's not around and giving interviews and talking about his music because I would be curious to find out if he had been given the chance, would he have preferred to do all the music on the album himself? Given how wide ranging his skills are in terms of instruments. Um, I wonder if he was pushed towards, having a bigger. I mean, what I it would have been good if I would have taken the time to listen to his earlier stuff. Is this is this is this record does this record sound more dense in terms of music? The thickness of the orchestration, does it sound
Oh yeah.
thicker than his other stuff? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I wonder how much of that was his choice and how much of that was producers trying to add their craft to his work.
But that there's a reason why this album is my favorite over Either Or, which was his one before this, is there's just more variation. Either Or is very much like guitar, vocals, guitar, vocals, guitar, vocals, guitar, vocals. It's just very much the same. And the songs do sound different. And there are a couple of songs on there, like No Name Number 5 is one of my favorites. A couple songs on there that really stand out as, lyrically, musically, very, very distinct. But this one is the first one, and it really comes at you with a punch with Sweet Adeline, because that song starts out very Elliott Smith, very much just, the solo vocalist with his guitar. And then all of a sudden you just get this whole orchestration that just comes out of nowhere. And listening to this album for the first time, that was very just intriguing, because it's not something that we were used to from him.
Yeah, I was just looking it up, and this is Wikipedia, but Either Or was the first time he got into bigger instrumentation, bass, drums, keyboards, and electrics, but he played all of it. So this is his first album with other people contributing instrumentally or so.
Yeah, and then where is my...
How do you compare Either Or to, what was the one before it, the self-titled one, Elliott Smith?
I didn't listen to that one. Oh, sorry. I meant Roman Candle. Roman Candle is the one that I was thinking. Roman Candle to me does not stand out compared to the other albums. Either Or is more stand out as an album, but it does have a bit of that quality of being very much the same. I don't remember the album Elliott Smith. I'd have to re-listen to it again. That's the one that I didn't get to in my research for this.
Yeah. Yep. I was interested. There's one thing we said here that was interesting that I'd like to explore in other genres or fields of art, and that is the thing of his stuff is his stuff. It doesn't get covered a lot, and his own particular interpretation and arrangements and approach are intrinsic to the song. And so I was trying to think of other musicians that are like that, like musicians that don't get covered either because it's too hard to cover their music or it's too idiosyncratic. And then I started thinking about art. I was thinking about maybe Claude Debussy in classical, where I just don't know enough about it. Tim, you might know more, but just somebody where the artist is incredibly unique, but doesn't fit into a lot of different corners of the artistic world, either within their genre or within their medium or not. Boy, did that make any sense whatsoever?
It did, to me at least.
Yeah.
The thing with Debussy, when he finally comes into his own, I mean, a lot of his earlier stuff sounds like very traditional for its time, but he eventually finds his own harmonic language, which comes to full fruit in La Mer, which is probably my favorite piece of his. But I think it would be very hard for other composers to compose using his musical vocabulary and not just sound like they were trying to copy Debussy, because his vocabulary is so distinct and such a part of how we hear him. We hear those those particular harmonic configurations. And those of us who know, at least, we hear Debussy, or like you said about Elliott Smith, it's either Elliott Smith or somebody who's copying Elliott Smith. So with Debussy, it's either Debussy or somebody who's copying Debussy, because there was nobody else who was using. Nobody probably felt comfortable using that kind of harmonic language. And then the modernists come along and do 12-tone music and serialism. But 12-tone and serialism is that's very general. You can do a lot of different things with that kind of compositional approach. Whereas with Debussy, it's in a way, it's almost extremely simple.
Yeah.
Because he'll just take a whole tone scale and he'll cruise along on a whole tone scale for half a song. I think that the same thing could probably be said for Elliott Smith, because as I said before, I immediately heard 60s pop influence, but it was clearly not 60s pop. And I don't think there was anybody. I mean, Beckett at least would know. And I think you already said there was nobody who sounded like Elliott Smith when Elliott Smith came around, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He was certainly
not
against
entirely.
Trump.
Yeah.
I think you can probably, I don't know his music well enough to say for sure, but if you look at how, a lot of people have covered Bob Dylan's tunes, and that's because you can take those lyrics and you can do other things musically behind them. I could see that being done with some of the songs that I heard on here. If you didn't try to just sound like you were covering Elliott Smith, if you could say, this thing that Pat Metheny once said, he said about covering a certain standard, all the things you are, why would you want to cover that standard for the 50th millionth time? And he said, because you have something to say about what those particular chord changes mean. And so I think if somebody were to approach Elliott Smith and say, I have this kind of perspective on what this Elliott Smith lyric is about, and that would be how, that would form the foundation of an arrangement of somebody else covering his tune and doing something with it.
Yeah.
If you're just going to sit there and copy it, Elliott Smith, then there's no point in doing the frickin' tune.
Which hasn't stopped people before, but yeah.
That's true, but how successful are they?
Debussy did have an influence in jazz harmonically. I know Wayne Shorter cited him as an influence. I think Charlie Parker did too. But then it's such a different context that nobody listens to that and goes, "Oh, you're ripping off Debussy," right? So, is it maybe that it's not just the song. It's not just the tune that is distinct, it's the arrangement, and they kind of seem merged in a way where you pull them apart at your own peril, or you just take one element of it and get rid of everything else, and you make it a whole different thing that could be unrecognizable.
I think it takes a lot of confidence on the part of an artist to do something like that with something of that level of quality. You have to have the balls and you have to have the skill. If you're missing either or, it's going to fail.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like the only cover that's been that's known in popular media of an Elliott Smith song was "Oh Well Okay" by indie rock band Grandaddy.
Okay.
In 2012 as a tribute to him. But yeah, other than that, I have never seen anyone do a cover or a reimagining of an Elliott Smith track.
Yeah. And that might be just because that kind of song craft is out of style right now, but it's still really interesting to me. It's like, well, it's like the Beatles happened and nobody covered the Beatles, right? I mean, I don't mean to compare the two of them, but it's sort of like, why?
Yeah, why would you want to, I don't know, potentially ruin something that is so just stands on its own, I guess.
Yeah, there's that. Like what Tim said about the Debussy stuff. It's sort of like it's more than just a set of chords and a melody. and words with it. It's a totality that if you mess with it, it doesn't work as much.
It seems to me, and I don't know his music or his lyrics well enough, but from what I was able to tell from listening to this album, and reading the lyrics, I think those lyrics are strong enough to exist outside of the music. In which case, you can take. I mean, I can't name anything specific, but I get
And the
the feeling.
melodies too, the lyrics and the melodies, those are good melodies.
Yeah. But
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
could definitely see some, like, definitely a lot of these songs. Tomorrow, Independence Day, Pizzala, A Question Mark. Yeah, there are a lot of them that could translate into reimagining.
Yeah. I mean, if you find one with a beautiful melody and lyric, I could see somebody like Esperanza Spalding taking that and doing something.
You know what I would love? I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
But I was just thinking, because one of our previous club discussion albums was Imogen Heap. I would love to hear a cover of I Didn't Understand by Imogen Heap.
Interesting.
I would die. That would make my year.
I would like to hear Billie Eilish do it and just completely deconstruct it so it's incomprehensible.
That would be cool
I just wanted to pass along one thing in terms of his impact on the culture. He got on Saturday Night Live. And so, and 3 guys from the album backed him up. He did Waltz Number 2, John Brion, Rob Schnoff. I think John Moen is on. No. Sam Coombs is on this album too.
Waltz Number 2 is another one of my favorites.
Although you do 2 songs in Saturday Night Live. I didn't see what else.
Some artists have done 3.
And Janet Weiss was his drummer for a while too. Speaking of Portland indie rock folk.
I'm kind of amazed, based on what I'm hearing about his personality, that he was willing to go on Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
That seems not like him.
But he also, I mean, he got pressured into doing the Academy Awards, and so the same kind of arm twisting might have happened for Saturday Night Live. I don't want to.
He probably had production like pressure on him to promote the album in these kinds of ways.
Yeah, or maybe he was given you need to go on tour for the next 3 months, or at least do Saturday Night Live. He says, "Oh, I'm not touring." Right? So,
well, from what I have read about him, it wasn't the like touring or live shows that he was opposed to. It was he just didn't want to be in the spotlight. But yeah, shouldn't have been such a great songwriter.
Yeah, he should have thought of that before.
But yeah, as we are getting to sort of the end here, I do want to talk briefly about his death, which, as we established before, is very tragic. I know a lot of us in the indie music scene were very saddened by the news when it came along, but it seems that because I remember hearing that it was suicide, and so I assumed that it was an overdose, knowing his history with drugs, but it seems that he was stabbed twice in the chest.
Yes, that's what I read.
And I find that odd. But apparently the coroners couldn't determine whether it was self-inflicted or not. And I'm like, do people often stab themselves in the chest? That seems difficult to do to yourself. I don't know. It just seems odd to me.
Yeah, it is weird. Seems like a weird way to kill yourself, but
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the one thing that is also hard for me. And one of the reasons I didn't do a bunch of listens is just like knowing all of what happened in his personal life with the dual mental illnesses and the substance abuse and stuff. It's just, I can't separate that as much as I would like to. Like, I just feel like I'm listening to a car crash, right? Because the stuff's in his lyrics, right? You could have bought this album and go, wow, that's really dark. And then, you hear about his life and go, that's an autobiography. That's less fun, And that's one of the struggles I've had is just like I can't say it's for the same reason like the Beatles Get Back documentary. I just cannot watch the first 2 hours
Hmm.
because all I can do is sit there and George is quitting. They're not getting George is quit, right? And I'm like filled with anxiety. I am not having fun. We're gonna skip when George quits, right?
Aw.
And it's not just me. I mean, but so that
I found every minute of that series totally engrossing and engaging. There was no way I was going to skip any of it.
I mean, I watched it twice, and I've watched the rest of it after the first 2 hours more than twice, right? But it was just like, every negative situation I've been in with the band and all the emotional Sturm and Drang and drama, it was just like, I don't need to relive this.
I guess my generation has been a little bit desensitized to it because a lot of our musical icons have either taken their own lives or have died under suspicious circumstances. So,
Yeah.
But
yeah, yeah, and that's the thing that was kind of weird about the Portland deification, the mascot of the music scene kind of stuff. It was just sort of like, to me, like unhealthy. But I had a young daughter, so I was probably more sensitive to that than most people. But
well, he was, like I think Beckett pointed this out, was that he was speaking directly to this generation of listeners who could identify with the things that he was talking about.
Yep. His music definitely resonated with my shriveled little depressed heart.
How old was he when this album came out?
Oh, that's a good question. I know he was only 32 when he died, or 34. 34.
So he was born in 1969. So that's exactly 30? Almost 30, 29.
He came out in 98, so yeah. 29.
Yeah.
Gosh.
So that's
so young. I didn't, when I was turning 30, man, I felt so old, but now I'm on the other side of that and I'm like, oh, it's so young.
Yeah. And my point was that he's of the same generation of the teenagers that were listening to that,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right?
I mean,
he's older, but he's not like
he was of the generation that was influencing those of us who were growing up during that time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Him and Kurt, and it just, that's why I say I think we were desensitized.
I think that, and some of this is based on my own experience, I think that depression has a way of stunting your aging. Your body keeps on aging, but I think when you suffer from depression, at least it's been my experience, that you get stuck in time. You get attached to the past in such a way that I don't think you necessarily grow emotionally, or mostly emotionally. So you become, so he was probably closer to being a teenager emotionally. And that's why he was able to speak to teens at that time. I don't know when his depression started, but I know that my depression stunted my emotional growth and left me stuck 10, 15, maybe even 20 years back.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And then I can imagine that, carrying into the fame and notoriety that he didn't want, that he garnered. And then, not to mention the aging factor playing into, like you said, like kind of stunted emotional growth. Whereas you're in this body that keeps getting older and you don't really know how to square the two. I don't know. I kind of feel that. I definitely don't feel my age. I'm like, wait a second. It's been how long?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you're lucky if you don't feel your age. People who feel their age, I'm not envious of.
Yeah. I have some friends like that.
Nobody ever says that, and they mean that as like, I feel great. I feel my age. It's like, oh, I'm sorry. It's healthy to not, I think,
Well,
emotionally,
but
mentally.
there's this thing that I noticed in the media and on Instagram and stuff is that there seems to be a movement among older women to own their age and to say, yeah, I'm 50 and I'm proud to be 50, or I'm 60 and I got gray hair and I'm fine with it, which is that's a very healthy thing.
Yeah.
It was always okay for men to be older, so we don't need to have that revolution because it was never a problem for men to do that. But women, once they I'm always surprised that 40-year-old women are referred to as older women. That's just shocking to
Are
me
you
because
okay? You don't spend a lot of time on Twitter because 26 is apparently where you peak now.
oh
So
Jesus.
I just had a thought about Elliott Smith, and I know we're running out of time. But what's interesting is that he was good at an art form that sort of requires of you that you're in the public eye. If he was a novelist, does Ursula K. Le Guin have to do anything publicly if she doesn't want to, right? She's got to get along with her publisher and her editor, right? But it's kind of it. Same thing for somebody like, Murakami. And it's so like how if he was in an art form that it wasn't required that he be out in the public, I mean, he still had a pair of serious mental diagnoses, and that's no small thing, no matter what your chosen art form asks of you. But it certainly would have been gentler on him if we were fine with our rock stars being like, Murakami or Ursula K. Le Guin. They show up when they want to, but they just burrow away for 5 years and nobody bugs them about it, right?
yeah, possibly. I mean, I guess it's testament to you can't really choose your art form. Like you can definitely develop different styles and different mediums and things like that. But like, yeah, I'm sure if he could have been a novelist, he would have pursued that, but he was drawn to music. He loved
Yeah.
it.
I wonder if, his songwriting and his playing and just recording without going out and doing live stuff, maybe that alone it was his therapy and he didn't want to. He probably needed to, but he probably didn't want to go beyond that if he didn't have to. He was getting what he needed therapeutically from the simple act of writing and recording his stuff.
Yeah. Well, and it seems like, even from the very beginning, like maybe he didn't even want to go the pro route because his girlfriend was the one who pushed him to even submit the recorded tape to even
Yeah.
get a label behind him. So
Yeah.
who knows?
Mm.
It's just one of those unanswered questions that we all wish we could ask him.
Yeah, I seem to recall what Kurt Cobain was never really thrilled with the fame that came being a success. And and it's really common among, well, not really common, but we see it a lot in singer-songwriters who come of age, post the 70s singer-songwriters, I think, where there's I don't know that it's inherently self-destructive, but it takes on that's how it manifests as a self-destructive thing. There's I don't know, but I think Kurt Cobain and Elliott Smith probably had quite a bit in common, and I bet a lot of singer-songwriters, I mean, there's a lot of happy singer-songwriters as well, but I think there's a good portion of them who are like Elliott Smith and Kurt Cobain.
Yeah.
And I think
Well,
equally Kurt Cobain resisted what was being asked of him now that he was selling a ton of records, and comparing how many records Elliott Smith sold versus Nirvana, it's like night and day. And it's a very different thing, but it's fundamentally kind of the same thing,
yeah,
right?
it's
They
very
want you to,
interesting parallel to draw. I hadn't even thought about it that way. But
and
we
I
are
think,
at 8 o'clock.
oh, yes.
So, any kind of final closing thoughts?
I'm just going to go back and listen to more of his stuff just to get a better sense of who he is. Sounds like a fascinating person.
Yeah, I'm curious now to watch some of the live recordings and see how those were musically performed.
He did not a ton, but he did enough TV stuff that there should be stuff on YouTube. He did some Danish TV thing. He did Saturday Night Live. So
Mhm.
hopefully, the only thing I want to leave with is, like, I think for any artist to come up with your fingerprint version of your art and play two notes and people know who you are, like Jaco Pastorius, like Charlie Parker, like Ella Fitzgerald, is the highest compliment. And you can certainly pay that about his recordings. I haven't listened to any of his live work, but certainly his recordings, nobody is under any illusion. Oh, is this a Kurt Cobain like lost demo? It's like, no, this is friggin' Elliott Smith.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Thank you guys for joining me and discussing one of my favorite albums of all time.
Well, thank you for having me.
And thank you out there on the interwebs for watching. If you are watching this on a replay, which is likely at this point, you can stay connected through the chat. So if you comment here, we will see your comments and we can respond to them. We'd love for you to be part of the discussion. Tune in next time. And like I said, support us on Patreon. And yeah. Let me put up the link one more time to the Facebook group. Get in here. It's a good time. We are a lot of fun, I promise.
Dragonfly Arts.
That's us. All right, guys. Have a good night.
See you soon.